Hello, St. Patrick's Acolytes. A while back we had an Acolyte training that was well attended, but I know not everybody was able to be here for it. So I wanted to make a video and share with you what I shared with them that day about acolyting at St. Patrick's, a few of the changes that we are introducing, and just a little refresher since it's been a little over a year since we've had our full complement of acolytes working. So first off, my hope is that in all things, God will be glorified. And that includes in our acolyting, in our serving at the altar, as you join with me and Father Wesley each Sunday to assist God's people in worship. So we want to glorify God in all that we do when we are up front. The acolyte, I think it's important to understand and to know that the acolyte is a minister. The acolyte is helping us proclaim the gospel in worship. And so what you do is you serve in the worship of God at the Lord's altar. And that's no small thing. That's no light thing. It's a very important and critical thing that you do each week. You are assisting both the priests and the congregation in worship. So what you do up front matters, and how you do it matters. We want to do things in kind of a threefold way, with dignity, humility, and care. And so we want to avoid both sloppiness and fussiness. So we don't want to go into either extreme of not caring or doing things in a sloppy manner. At the same time, we understand that there's grace, and we don't want to be just silly and fussy about what we do. So we want to kind of walk that middle path of dignity, humility, and care. Your role is important. When you are doing your job well, you blend into the worship. And that's something, again, that I think is important to emphasize, is that as a priest, when I'm up front leading worship, my goal is really to blend into the worship of the church. And that is the acolyte's goal as well. So we avoid doing things that bring people or take people out of the worship mindset. So if we are goofing around up front or talking during the Eucharist, then that calls attention to what you are doing and pulls attention off of what the priest is doing or the preacher is doing or the readers are doing. So we want to avoid anything that would distract or pull people away from the worship of the Lord. Remember, this is a ministry, and take pride in it. What you do is important, and I'm grateful that we have such a strong acolyte corps that work so hard each week to do well. I want our acolytes to be excellent in all things. And so it is in giving our best that we give glory to God. So how do we give our best? How do you do your ministry with dignity, humility, and care, and blend into the worship background? And all this is to say that we're not doing this well, but this is a refresher for you. This is a refresher for all of us who serve at the Lord's altar. I think one of the first ways that we do this is by dressing in uniformity. You wear, as an acolyte, a cassock and a cotta. The cotta is the white garment, and the cassock is the black garment. And so when you are dressing, check the mirror before you come out. Make sure your cotta is hanging straight across here. It's basically even front to back, and it's the right height. It should fall about the waist or slightly below the waist. We've had a few midriff cottas lately where they've been up here. So we want to keep the cottas waist level or slightly lower. And make note of what sizes you wear so that when you go in to get vested, you can quickly grab the right size cassock and cotta for yourself. Make sure your cassock is snapped up to the top. Don't leave buttons undone and leave the collar open. We don't need any Elvis acolytes running around, so keep that buttoned up. Black or dark shoes, please. Flats, ladies. No bright ribbons or bows in the hair. Again, we don't want to distract from worship by bright shoes or by anything that would cause people to kind of look and be curious about. So we want to do things sort of plainly. And so dark shoes, please do that. No sneakers, dark dress shoes. Boys, comb your hair. Yeah, run a comb through that hair before you come to church. Shave also, if you are of age to shave. Unless you're growing a beard, shave. We're trying to give our best to the Lord. And check each other. Help one another. Don't take offense if somebody straightens your kata. I have that happen to me probably 3 out of 4 Sundays. Somebody straightens my stole or my surplice or my chasuble. And I'm always grateful because I don't want to walk in such a way where I've got things messed up. So check each other and help one another. And you'll hear me say that several times throughout this teaching. So first thing we do is we want to dress in uniformity and dress neatly and dress consistently. So please do that. Second, we need to understand liturgical movement. This is something we practiced the day of our training, and it's something that the longer you serve, the more you become attuned to liturgical movement. And what I mean by that is it's neither too fast nor too slow. It has a certain pace to it. So when you are coming from the altar to get the plates, for instance, or walking from up here in the chancel over to the lectern to do the prayers of the people, it's not a fast walk. You're not doing the mall walk, if you remember some of you remember those days where people would walk through the malls for exercise. It's a slow, methodical, comfortable pace that we want to. We don't want to be in too fast or too slow. Participate in the liturgy. This is a big one. When someone looks up front at the acolytes or the priests or anyone up in the chancel, their eyes should immediately be drawn into the action, whatever is going on. So during the sermon, you're paying attention to the sermon. When we're singing, you have your hymnal out and you're singing. When we are doing the Eucharist, your eyes and your attention is given to the Eucharistic actions. So we want to be sure that we're doing those things well, and we're bowing, we're crossing ourselves, we're doing things together and in unity as we celebrate and worship. Again, because if you're looking around, looking up at the ceiling, looking out at people, counting, or doing something like that, that's distracting, that calls attention to yourself and pulls people's attention off of the action that they should be paying attention to in the service. If you are not carrying anything, your hands are folded at the waist or slightly above the waist. So we don't want anybody walking like they're back on the block here. If you're not carrying anything like the plates or a book, your hands are folded here. And you'll see the priests do this. You can also do this if you like, but your hands are folded here. So no one should be walking to get the plates or to the lectern again with your arms swinging. And part of the reason is your robes are made for your hands to be up. Particularly priest robes, but also katas. Sometimes you can drop your hands and kind of lose your hands because your robes are long. So you want to keep them up at all times. It just adds a dignity to the service. Make sure your cell phones are off. We've had a few instances of cell phones going off, and I can't say a whole lot. A few years ago, I had my cell phone go off in a service, and I know that can happen. So ensure that your cell phones are off. I would really prefer if we didn't bring them into worship at all, but please keep them off. We are suspending the practice of reverencing while kneeling. That was something that we have done in the past, but what I've noticed is our acolytes tend to ball up, as I said in the training, like a roly-poly. So when we get to the Eucharist and you're on your kneelers, remain upright. If you would like to acknowledge the Eucharist in the bow, just bow your head and your shoulders. but we don't want to ball up on those kneelers. The other problem that I was seeing with that is that people never came up. They'd stay balled up and almost laying on the floor up front on the chancel. So we don't want to do that. Do not play with kneelers. I've had a few people, when they're seated, they're playing with the kneelers. They're picking them up and dropping them with their feet. So don't play with your kneelers. If you are short, and my daughter Caitlin falls into that category, it can be tempting to sit on the chairs, and if your feet don't touch the ground, to kind of swing your feet. The way to avoid that is take a kneeler and put it under your feet so you have some place to put your feet when you are seated. Do not slide over the chair to get up. Some people, when they're going to kneel particularly, will slide themselves to the end of their chair and then sort of slide off the chair onto the kneeler, and sometimes that slings the chair forward, and then its back legs kind of slam down and make kind of a boom in the chancel. So just lift yourself up and sit down to kneel. Do not cross over for the sermon. I did this for a bit as sort of a courtesy to the preachers as another priest that I wanted to watch, particularly when Father Ray was here or Father Wesley was here before I was seated on the side of the altar that I'm on now. I would cross over. And we had several acolytes that started crossing over. So again, that just creates more. So we're not crossing over anymore. We'll stay seated where we are for the sermon. Do not fidget. Okay, fidgeting. We've got some people that are real fidgety. Some play with their hair, stare at the ceiling. All those things again call attention to yourself. Sit up straight. Focus on the action that's happening. Honest mistakes happen, and we don't have any problem when honest mistakes happen. I make them. Father Wesley makes them. All of us make them if we've been serving for 2 months or 20 years. And we understand that. So there's grace. What we're trying to avoid and we're trying to remind ourselves of are those things that we can fix, those things that we can deal with, that we don't need to be doing. They aren't really mistakes. They're just more inattention to detail. So honest mistakes happen. There's grace. There's no worries if you make a mistake. Be prepared for changes. There are times when we have to make changes on the fly. Father Ray used to call this heads-up baseball in church. And we have to, sometimes things happen and we've got to make changes on the fly. So be willing and be flexible and take direction and listen to the priests and particularly your adult leaders that can help you in those moments where we have to make a change. And again, police each other. That's an army term that we used to say when we police one another. We're watching one another. So if your neighbor is roly-polied up on a kneeler, kind of nudge them a little bit and remind them to sit up straight. If they're not participating in the liturgy, hand them a book. Help them to get back into the mindset that they should be in. So we said first, we want to operate with dignity, humility, and care. And we said the first thing was by dressing in uniformity, and the second thing was by understanding liturgical movement, which leads to not being distracting. And the third thing is by being diligent. We ask that our acolytes arrive 20 minutes before the service and be vested and ready to go between 10 minutes and 5 minutes till. This aids us in knowing who's here and who's not when we need to get a substitute, or it reminds us that it helps us to be in the mindset for worship. If you roll in here at 8:58 and throw on your vestments, grab a torch or grab a cross and start walking up the aisle, your mind probably is not settled well for worship. So we want to be vested early and talking with one another and praying together before we start our worship so that we can be in the proper mindset for worship. Make sure your parents know this if you depend on them for a ride, that those Sundays that you're serving, you need to be here 20 minutes early. If you cannot serve and those things happen, you get sick Sunday morning or you get sick Saturday night or something comes up, it is your responsibility to get a substitute. And we're going to be providing call lists for our acolytes, so you have people you can call to get your substitute. It really does mean no good to get a text at 8:45 that we need an acolyte. We're growing. We're growing too much for me to handle all of those details. So please get your own substitute, especially if you know you're going to be out of town or on a trip or on vacation and you're scheduled. Please get your substitute. If you were suddenly ill on Sunday morning, this sort of speaks to that. Call Mark Miller or Ross Lester, give them a text or a shout and let them know. They are much more on a Sunday morning able to respond to that than I am. So all of these, I know I've given a lot of do's and don'ts and a few adjustments, and it's not because we are doing anything particularly poorly. It's just to do things with excellence. We need these reminders from time to time, and we need to remind one another of the great ministry to which you are called and you are a part of as an acolyte. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me or grab me when you next see me. I'll be glad to help. And thank you very much for your service to St. Patrick's Church. Thank you for being faithful and for helping us all in our worship of our Lord Jesus Christ.